Welcome to LFC Transfer Hub, Liverpool's craziest winter transfer deadline days. £57 and 8 pence M forwards and emergency defenders. Liverpool look set to let another winter transfer window pass with no major permanent incomings, although discussions are ongoing for a loan move for Luchil Geertruida. That move comes after Jeremy Frimpong was the latest to be struck down by the defensive injury curse, picking up a suspected groin complaint just 4 minutes into the 6-0 hammering of Qarabag at Anfield on Wednesday night, Jan 28. But Arne Slot has so far stuck to his guns, reaffirming Liverpool's long-term approach under owners FSG. Speaking to the press after the game, Slot said, "We as a club always make smart decisions. We not only look at the short term but the long term. That's why we sign young players who can develop. It always depends on if there are players that are available that we think can help us. If they are, can we afford them? And is this to be helpful for the longer-term future? Because our players come back from injury as well. We have to do smart things for the near future and the longer future." In other words, Liverpool fans should prepare for a fairly quiet deadline day, but it hasn't always been thus. Here we'll explore 3 memorable winter transfer deadline days that will live long in the memory. Liverpool were in something of a transitional phase in the 2006-07 season, having finished third and won the FA Cup the previous season, but seeing their Champions League defence fail at the round of 16 with a 3-0 aggregate defeat to Benfica. Ahead of the new season, Rafa Benitez brought in Craig Bellamy, Jermaine Pennant, Fabio Aurelio, Dirk Kuyt and Gabriel Paletta, as the Reds squad underwent an overhaul with established names like Didi Hamann, Fernando Morientes and Jimmy Traore making way. This would also be the final season at Liverpool for Jerzy Dudek and Luis Garcia, while legendary striker Robbie Fowler would only manage 6 league starts in his final season following his return to Anfield. The season started inconsistently, with a crushing 3-0 defeat at Goodison, followed by a 1-0 loss at Stamford Bridge. A disappointing 2-0 loss away to Bolton Wanderers followed before the end of September. The Reds found much more consistency throughout December and January, however, winning 9 of their 10 Premier League games ahead of a dramatic transfer deadline day. Jan 31, 2007 Liverpool wrapped up Alvaro Arbeloa's signing in a relatively straightforward manner compared to their other major signing on deadline day. Arbeloa joined from Deportivo La Coruna for £2.6 million as competition for Steve Finnan, with fellow Spaniard Francis Duran joining the academy from Malaga, also on deadline day, while Duran never represented the first team at Liverpool, ultimately retiring at the age of just 26. Arbeloa went on to make 98 appearances for the Reds, replacing Finnan in the Champions League final later that year and taking his starting berth from the following season. Liverpool's other major signing was significantly more complicated. In a story that goes back to the previous summer, top clubs across Europe were alerted to the situation of Argentine midfield destroyer Javier Mascherano after his performances in the 2006 FIFA World Cup. But it was West Ham United that wrapped up the double signing of Mascherano and Carlos Tevez from Corinthians just before the summer window closed. Resembling an early experiment into what would later become multi-club ownership, the double deal was controversial at the time, as both players were actually owned by third-party companies, all with the involvement of businessman Kia Joorabchian. Joorabchian's company Media Sport Investment, MSI, had pumped millions into Corinthians, working with Joorabchian's other companies to finance a glut of signings in return for a majority share of profits. However, the finances involved were unusually opaque, with Brazilian lawyers finding offshore accounts had been used to carry out transactions, attracting allegations of money laundering. After the signings of Tevez and Mascherano, MSI announced discussions into a takeover of West Ham, which was ultimately unsuccessful. Pressure had started to mount on MSI and Joorabchian, and an arrest warrant was issued for him in Brazil the following year, though the charges were ultimately dropped, and the group absolved of wrongdoing in 2014. During the months following the double signing, West Ham's form suffered, and the Premier League opened an investigation into the nature of the deals, given that West Ham had not fully disclosed the ownership rights of the players involved. The fear was that the third-party company's involvement would have an influence on West Ham's sporting and financial decisions, giving Joorabchian an inappropriate level of control over the club. Mascherano was on the fringes in the first half of the season, with suspicions that financial clauses could be influencing team selection. This opened up an opportunity for Liverpool, who requested clearance from FIFA to take Mascherano on loan from the Hammers, or more accurately, from MSI on Jan 16, 2007. It took over 2 weeks for FIFA to clear the request on deadline day, but even then the Premier League refused to decide whether the Argentine would be permitted to play for Liverpool in the light of the furore around his ownership. The other issue was that Mascherano had already played for both Corinthians and West Ham that season, with FIFA prohibiting a player from paying for more than 2 clubs in the same season. Finally, on Feb 20, the Premier League permitted Liverpool to register Mascherano, who at last made his debut against Sheffield United 4 days later. Voted man of the match in the 2-1 Champions League final defeat to AC Milan, Mascherano locked down a place in Liverpool's midfield and never looked back. With Liverpool eventually securing his full rights from MSI in 2008, before a transfer to Pep Guardiola's all-conquering Barcelona side in 2010, winter deadline day 2006-07 was also the day that Sovereign Wealth Fund Dubai International Capital, DIC, pulled out of a deal to take over ownership of Liverpool. Allowing asset-stripping private equity investors, to put it kindly, Tom Hicks and George Gillett to purchase the club from David Moyes the following week, probably the most memorable of all of Liverpool's winter deadline days. The 2010-11 winter transfer window came to a close on January 31. 2011 Liverpool were in turmoil in the 2010-11 season. The Hicks and Gillett takeover had proven disastrous, with protests erupting as early as 2008, after it emerged the pair had essentially mortgaged the club to complete the purchase. In the midst of what has been described as a civil war between ownership and fans, Liverpool crawled to a 7th-place finish in the 2009-10 season, a drastic drop-off from the title challenge of the previous year. Rafa left by mutual consent at the end of the season, with Roy Hodgson chosen as his replacement. But the situation only got worse, with Hodgson wildly unsuited to the role and debt, nearly forcing the club into administration in October 2010. New England Sports Ventures, NESV, now Fenway Sports Group, FSG, then bought the club for just £300 million, finally freeing Liverpool from the parasitic ownership of Hicks and Gillett. But the writing was on the wall for Hodgson, who lasted just 6 months in the job he was given in July 2010, replaced by Kenny Dalglish on an initial caretaker basis on Jan 8. This was hardly a stable situation in which to enter the transfer window, to say the least. Liverpool were mired in 12th place following Hodgson's sacking, and it took until Dalglish's 4th game in charge for Liverpool to win. Liverpool had been tracking a young Uruguayan striker at Ajax by the name of Luis Suarez, who was earmarked as a potential partner up top for star striker Fernando Torres. Suarez had scored a whopping 35 goals in 33 Eredivisie games the season prior, but had been suspended in November for biting PSV's Otman Bakel. Liverpool made contact alongside several other European clubs, and were preparing a bid when news arrived that would prove era-defining for the club. On Jan 27, Chelsea submitted a £40 million bid for Torres. The initial bid was rejected by Liverpool, but El Nino's head had already been turned. Torres submitted a transfer request the following day, leaving Liverpool with 3 days to complete a late scramble to find a replacement. Newcastle striker Andy Carroll, who had scored against Liverpool the month prior, was the man identified. Carroll had just signed a new 5-year contract at Newcastle, making a deal for the big Geordie expensive to say the least. Liverpool went ahead with a club record £22.8 million bid for Suarez the same day Torres submitted his transfer request, which was accepted by Ajax, but the Reds weren't done there. A £30 million bid for Carroll was submitted early on deadline day, which already would have made him Liverpool's most expensive signing of all time, but rejected by Newcastle. Suarez's signing, meanwhile, was confirmed when the Uruguayan put pen to paper on a 5.5-year contract on Jan 31. El Pistolero would go on to fire Liverpool to the brink of a league title, and for all his many personal flaws, has a strong case to be considered the most talented player to ever wear the red shirt. Carroll, however, was a gilded flop. Newcastle accepted a £35 million bid later on deadline day, making Carroll by far Liverpool's most expensive signing and the most expensive English player of all time. Despite memorable moments including a late-headed winner against Everton in the FA Cup semi-final at Wembley, Carroll was never quite suited to Liverpool, and only managed to score 11 goals from 58 appearances. Oh, and disastrous Hodgson signing Paul Konchesky, left on loan to Nottingham Forest.